Good morning. Welcome to the best day of the week that I personally think. It's Data Day. We have amazing Brady Bunch Foursquare going on. What's going on, gents? What's going on?
Celebrity Square.
Brady Bunch Force. What was that? Celebrity
Celebrity
Squares. Hollywood
Celebrity
Squares.
Yeah, Hollywood Squares. There we
We
go.
had Celebrity Squares in Australia growing up. Yeah, loved that show. Loved it. We need two more people to get the
Yeah.
free buy.
So everybody in the audience wants to hop on. We'll put the link. But what's going on, guys? What's going on? How's your yesterday going? Wednesday. It's one of our favorite days of the week. The last Wednesday of the month. How's the month gone for each and every one of you guys?
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's we just had TIA last week, so it's been a wild month. I've got a lot of travel coming up in May. This is sort of peak conference travel season for those of us in the business. Then we go into the summer holiday period. So I'm about to take my son on a cross-country trip to Lake Tahoe from Boston. He's moving out there for a new job, so we're packing up and getting in his truck, and we're going to bang out 3,000 miles.
Nice.
And relocate, and then I'll fly home. So
that's like nothing to you.
I don't know. That's like a regular weekend, right?
It's a week's. It's like almost a week's work in Australia. Almost.
A week's worse.
That's probably Thursday. You probably get to Thursday for like 3,000 miles.
Yeah. Like we used to call you super singles.
Strong singles.
Yeah,
right.
But you know what's a very strong thing. Our intro video is very, very strong. So let's hop into it, boys.
You're just slick on the.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
You've had slick transitions, man. Look at you.
I was telling these guys before we went on air, like I'm not here for my looks only. Like, this is not the Bachelor podcast, This is
Thank the
Saturday
Lord.
Sales Chatter. But it's we're happy to have everybody here.
My wife would like that.
Well, congratulations first and foremost to Jeff, What Age Cowboy, for being on Dad IQ live yesterday, which should be Tuesday. Dan and I had an amazing guest yesterday, Casey Jenkins, who, wow, just mind blown with just the information that she has. Definitely a must follow. Dean, always a pleasure. Let's get started right into it with the market update of what's been going on. Is there any kind of numbers that we're kind of closing the month? What's going on in the data world?
Yeah, pretty. It depends who you are, right? Whether you're a broker, carrier, or shipper. If you're a carrier, it's pretty bleak. I guess if you're a broker, margins are still pretty good. You've been able to expand your margins because you're buying capacity at a lower rate, although that could change soon. And I guess shippers have been pretty happy to be seeing both spot and contract rates continue to decrease. But here we are in the end of April, and we're still not seeing much seasonality, if any, emerge in the market. There's a real fear, as Jeff and I talked about yesterday on the show, that 2019 reemerges, which was an ugly year for transportation. There was no peak season. It was just a slow grind. So we're sort of, as we talked about last week on the show, we're looking for some seasonality. It hasn't emerged yet, although there are some glimmers of hope on the West Coast in produce world. There are some good produce volumes starting to come out now. Things have dried out and the atmospheric rivers have backed off that we had in January. So that, volumes are still way behind where they were this time last year. By my calculations, we're about 3 to 4 weeks behind where we'd normally be with produce volumes off the West Coast. That has slowed down the uptick in spot rates that normally happens around the Vidalia onion pack date, which was April 16. That's kind of the official starting line of the produce season. As we said on our show yesterday, if you look from April 16 to July 4, dry van rates go up about 21 cents a mile and reefer rates go up about 26 cents a mile. They both go up to this sort of peak around July 4. They have done in past years. It was a non-event last year, as we discussed numerous times. So it could be later. We could see as much volume come into the market, but that depends on how many parties you and I and everybody else want to throw and buy food and go back to some sort of normality around these big sort of seasonal events like July 4. So we're at this point where Jeff made a really good point yesterday, and it got me thinking about where carriers are. We were talking about 2019. So if we talk about carriers for a moment, they're the ones that I think are going to determine the speed of the market cycle transition, because we don't see any demand, right? So we don't think this market cycle is going to be driven by a sudden rush of demand for freight that we haul, because the reality is we're probably going to spend more on services, eating out at restaurants and traveling, than buying stuff that we did during the pandemic. So I went back to 2019. I looked at the average operating costs, which will be in a blog post next week. Everybody can download it and have a look. And I produced this chart that compares the operating costs to spot rates and then the gross profit per margin of a long haul truck, including wages, fuel, insurance, tires, accommodation, phones, all the subscriptions. So it's everything it costs to run a long haul truck down the road. In 2019, the average gross profit was minus 0.2 cents a mile. So they were after wages and everything, they were generating negative $2,000. Now, I'll put that into context. When you run a truck, you need to have, steer tires on the front are $500 a pop, maybe $600 if you're running good Michelins. So you need to have a couple of those always on hand, or cash to buy them, because you could blow one at any time. Yep. So they call that $1,000. Like you need $1,000 for just 2 tires in emergencies. You need half a dozen spare filters. There's $300 sitting around in case you get a bad batch of fuel. Let alone have enough cash for an in-frame rebuild on your engine, which could run you anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000. So that's the sort of profit you need to run a truck. But so if you're losing $2,000, you can see why 2019 was the year that forced so many carriers out of the industry. We saw record bankruptcies in the middle of the year. So fast forward to this year, so far, the average gross profit margin so far this year is 9 cents a mile in the positive. So it's only $9,000. But, we started off the year making 21 cents a mile gross profit. That's 21,000, 100,000 loaded miles. We're down to about 3 cents a mile today. So we aren't, carriers aren't, so the carrier that's running close to the wind is a breakdown away from going out of business. Yeah. And that is a really, so we're not at 2019 levels because they were unprofitable for most of the year. And that's what forced a lot of carriers out of the industry. We're very, very close to that now. Luckily diesel came down 4 cents this week to 407.7, 408. So that's good news. If diesel keeps coming down, that will give carriers some breathing room. But if diesel goes up and rates continue to slide, then it just means that David Jackson's prediction on his earnings call this week is 100% accurate, which will be when the market turns, there'll be fewer trucks available, which is the point I think I'm trying to get to for everyone here is when do we reach bottom in the market, and what happens when we do, because we're very close to the bottom, not there, and that just means that at some point the market tightens. And I think shippers are acutely aware of this. Jeff said yesterday on the show that there are a lot of shippers still playing the transactional market. They will be the first ones, I think, surprised to see that a lot of capacity has disappeared, and those carriers with good memories will put them on the 4-letter word list and will say no thanks. But that's why
their costs will go up dramatically.
Yeah. But that's why the high end of the market, if you think back to where we were maybe 4 months ago when we started talking about RFP trends, because one of the things we observed, and it's played out, was large shippers were working with both brokers and carriers and rewarding their incumbent carriers with more volume to lock most of that capacity. Remember, on the show prior, we said that 80% of volume in the contract world moves on 20% of the lanes. So shippers locked in those 20% of the lanes with their incumbent carriers. Rates came down, but they got more volume. We've heard that from a number of shippers and carriers. So the rest of the volume that's low volume lane is what we're seeing go direct to brokers. And we've seen so far this year about 3% more spot market volume go to non-asset brokers, 3PLs this year on low volume lanes that aren't going into the contract market. So it means that I think carriers are aware, shippers are aware that when the market tightens, they knew it was coming. That's why they've locked in their capacity. Whereas the lower lanes, I guess there's going to be some shippers caught out because spot rates will go up. There's no question. I don't know that we won't see 2021, 2022 spot rate levels. I don't think in our lifetime. Gosh, that's a hot take. I could be proven wrong by that, but we certainly won't see that, I don't think, this year. So that's where we are. We're in the end of April, and Jeff had a great point yesterday about Memorial Day, right? If we don't see, how far did we say, Jeff, was what Memorial Day was?
We're about 33 days away at data point 148 on the graph.
Yep. In the middle of that, so this is something to keep in mind. Carriers generally keep running when things are lean. They want to run more miles. They haven't been running more miles. For the first time ever, Todd Amon from ATBS reported last year that when rates drop, carriers run more miles to get their revenue per truck week up. Last year, they didn't. They ran about 11% fewer miles, even though rates went down, because it's harder to run the miles. It's harder to get trucks out of shops. They've still got parts shortages. There's lots of reasons for delays on loading docks and shipper receiver docks, etc. So carriers aren't running more miles, and normally they would around road check week, International Road Check Week, which is May 15. Normally you see about 10% of the capacity just take time off. In lean times like this, normally they keep running. So it's not all carriers take time off. It's important to know that reefer carriers take about double the amount of time off that dry van and flatbed carriers do. That's where. So why is that important? If carriers sit out road check week like they normally do, capacity tightens, rates go up. That's one of the reasons that leading up to the 4th of July, produce season and dry van rates in reefers kind of go up, is because you get this capacity hit in road check week. Now, it's interesting this week because a lot of carriers are going to keep running, I think, that's my prediction, but they're going to get caught up in really lengthy delays. So I was talking to a produce carrier last week that runs off the West Coast. They're already advising their carriers they're going to be 18 to 24 hours late with loads in that week. Because when you come off the West Coast, there's not many roads that run. When you come out of Fresno down to Bakersfield, there's not many roads that run east. If you think about the interstates, there's the 10, the 8, and the 40. You're stuck. Like if they set up a road check on one of those roads, there's not much option to go around it. A lot of carriers are going to spend hours and hours and hours with loads of produce waiting to get through. So I think in areas where there are not many options for carriers to bypass the road checkpoint, you're going to see capacity tighten and maybe rates go up. So there's a lot of things that could happen between now and Labor Day. But I think Ken said on our show yesterday, Jeff, the catalyst is going to be the capacity movement. And in this case, capacity exiting the industry. And Ken made a great point, where supply reduces to the point where it meets demand, because we're not going to see demand increase. So I think for everybody out there that's selling capacity, what we're looking at is if you're doing RFPs now, I would expect that the capacity is going to cost you more in a few months' time. That would be the expectation if the market tightens and rates start to go back up.
Yeah, something, Dean, to go back to your comment about the RFPs. What I see happening, and I'm going off experience, the rates are low. You got those contracted RFPs out there. A lot of the reps that are out there, they're going to start looking at their OR. And lo and behold, they're going to come to you and going to go, listen, I looked at the OR. It's unsustainable. I got to take a 3 or 4% increase in order to be profitable.
Right.
I see that coming. I see that coming if you're going to lock into the long-term contract. It always happens that way, and they overextend themselves. And I think this is not the market to do that. What are your thoughts?
I think what a lot of folks don't realize is if we're getting close to 2019 rates, the operating costs between this year and 2019 were 21 cents a mile higher. So that's where carriers are going to draw the line. A lot of carriers, you just can't run for less than what it's costing you we're already at break even. So carriers are going to be wanting to start to put their rates back up when that supply demand equilibrium starts to meet. We're not far off that. So that's why, we're sort of in limbo right now because we haven't seen seasonality emerge, and that's a big if. We're holding out a lot of hope that produce season will do that. So, but I think the prediction that we had early in the year on our contract side was that the second half of the year would be much better than the first half because there's more demand factors that will, bring us back once the inventory levels get run down and we get into that regular cadence of import shipping and, summer activities. So, and peak shipping season looks like it could happen again in a normal time frame around September, October on the import side.
But I think the biggest data point, Dean, and if you could follow up on that and bring it next week, would be what are the current inventory levels right now over the last several weeks, and how much percent have they dropped, or are they remaining the same? It's going to tell you a lot what the future is going to bring based upon those.
Right. Yeah, so we're not the bearer of good news. I mean, if you're a shipper and a broker, probably it's still pretty good times. I've always got to remember that there's three sides to this stool, three legs of this stool: brokers, carriers, and shippers. I always look at the market from a carrier's perspective, so I always bring this bias. But carriers move loads. They're the only ones moving the freight physically, and without them, nothing moves. So, but right now, we've still got a lot more capacity in the market than we do loads. It was interesting. The ATA truckload tonnage index came out last week. It was down. They moved about, I think it was about 5% more tons in March, but seasonally adjusted, it was down where they expected it to be.
But was it down from like COVID years, or was it down from pre?
Just year over year, down year over year.
Just year over year. Okay.
Yeah, Dan. A lot of the data points are suggesting when you look at all the volume indexes, they look very similar to 2019 levels, which is the sort of the scary part of this equation, because rates were lower, operating costs were lower, but rates have been heading south at way too fast a clip. And operating costs are still high. We're still seeing diesel above $4. If you think back to that period from 2011 to 2016, we averaged $4, just over $4 a gallon for diesel over nearly 4 years. It was a pretty rough period. We're only just back down to that level now. We're about $1.02 a gallon lower than this time last year.
But then you're adding a lot of the other aspects that weren't there in 15, 16, 17, which is driver wages have gone up. People that bought trucks during the COVID period or whatever it was have paid more, even after have paid more. Like everything's going up. Everything, even food. Like I couldn't believe how much food has gone up in the grocery store. And I've only not shopped since August. My wife's been doing the grocery shop since August, and I went yesterday, and I was like, again, because I remember what it was costing. So even a driver on the road, it's going to cost him more to live on the road than it did before. Like, it's not just the truck and all, it's everything included, clothes on the road and everything. It's parking on the road, and like everything's gone up.
So that's why operating costs today for my average long haul truck is $1.78 a mile. It was $1.94 a mile last year because diesel was much higher. So even at $1.78, that's 10 cents a mile higher than the exact week in 2019. And but if $1.78 is your break even, the national average rate excluding fuel is around that level. So you've got to be getting, a rate that includes some of the fuel surcharge just to be surviving these days. But again, when people talk about this, we're talking about fairly small numbers. Most of the truckload market's doing pretty well. Like the contract carriers are still doing well, even though they're having tougher quarter over quarter earnings because it's things are getting harder. They're coming off a really big 2021, 2022 period profitability wise. They have high driver wage costs, as you mentioned, Dan. So they've got higher operating costs, and but they're going to. I think they are in a pretty good position. We're talking about the outer edges of the industry where there's a lot of carriers in the spot market that probably overcapitalized during the pandemic and paid a lot more for used trucks. When I look at the chart that I'll be publishing next week, it's got error bands set at 10 cents a mile plus or minus the $1.78. If you run $2,000 a month for finance on a truck and $1,000 a month for a trailer, there's $3,000 a month. It's 31 cents a mile, 30 cents a mile there alone for finance. If you're a person that owns your own truck and trailer and you've been in this industry for a lot of years, you could take 30 cents a mile straight off that $1.78 and still break even. So like when we talk about averages of $1.78 to run a truck or $2.10 a mile national average, there's a spread either side of that you've really, it's not everybody is going to be running at that operating cost. People that have been around have got lower operating costs. People that are newer have got much higher operating costs, and that's where the margins are the tightest, and they're the ones that are getting squeezed the hardest right now because of higher operating costs. And they are the ones that desperately need that gross profit to pay for the inevitable engine rebuild on used trucks they've paid too much for, that are loaded with emissions on them that don't last all that long. I know that I can run to 1.2 million miles on my Caterpillar before I even have to think about pulling the engine out and rebuilding it. A lot of these newer engines, you're looking at 500,000 miles before you need to be starting to think about rebuilding the engine. They just don't last as long as what they used to. And so I posted a picture on social media the other day of I went to Caterpillar Parts to buy some filters, because I always carry a bunch of filters and fan belts and belts in my truck just in case. And on the floor was a rebuilt Cummins X15 for $55,000. So it's a 2021 engine that hasn't done many miles, but it was $55,000 before you spend labor to put the engine in the truck. So I think it shocks a lot of people what it costs. Remember my good friend last year from Nova Scotia had an engine fail on him. It was, by the time he did the drivetrain, the engine, the tow, he was up for $85,000 on his Peterbilt, and he had to refinance the truck. And so I think that there's a lot of cost that goes into that. And I suspect that a lot more carriers are more educated on what it costs to run a truck this time around. We did see the 2018-19, repeat itself, but to a lesser degree, because they were coming off the back of, as we've said, one of the most profitable periods since deregulation that lasted for, heck, when you see the chart next week, it's kind of mind-blowing how much gap there was above operating costs and rates. There are only very few companies that didn't make money, which still is one of the mysteries, how you didn't make money in that period as a carrier. So that's the market update. That's kind of a long-winded market update, but
the number one is probably the Range Rover, the Ferrari that they bought that just kind of ate into that capital.
We don't talk about that, Dan. We don't really know. All carriers are struggling. They're barely making ends meet. So
I think they ate pretty well and took a lot of vacations. I know that for a fact. Yeah.
For the argument's sake, right? We're talking about groceries going up and products are going up, yet the cost of transportation is going down, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to have an argument with a shipper, it's like, you're telling us to reduce our costs. How about reducing the cost on your shelf products that you're selling to the consumer? You're saving on the back end. How about the front end? I mean, but they don't do that, right? But they ask you and squeeze you to come down. I mean, isn't that ironic a little bit?
Yeah. Well, we talk to carriers all the time. We've got a bunch of YouTube videos about negotiation at DAT. You've got to be very good at negotiating. These are just table stakes. You've got to know your operating costs. And as my blog post says this week, which leads to our produce calendar, Ryan, if you want to throw that up, you've got to understand the demand for what you haul. And, that's table stakes these days, is understanding the demand. What I put together last week is a produce calendar festival calendar. So what it shows you are all the festivals that are on. Why would you care about festivals? Well, to me, it's a marker of when produce is moving. So this week we've got the Skagit Valley Tulip Festival. We've got the big Tulip Festival in Holland, Michigan. And of course, they're both on the same latitude as Holland, Amsterdam, Holland, which is the tulip capital of the world. So you've got tulips moving. We've got a California Strawberry Festival coming up. We've just had the Vidalia Onion Festival. The Florida Plant City Festival was on in March. That's really the first big one of the year. And as you can see, you work your way all through the year, whether it's apples, avocados, peaches, asparagus. There are all these festivals that are on throughout the year that if you're a broker or a 3PL and you're looking to buy capacity or help a shipper move freight, these are the dates when there's normally a peak in that particular produce. So, you got to see, blueberries, the National Cherry Festival in Travis, Michigan. Yeah. These events are on when the prices for their products are as high as they're possibly going to be. It's when their harvesting is at its peak. It's when truckload volumes are going to be at their peak. And it's when the rate per mile is going to be normally at its peak, and capacity is hardest to buy. So I talk to carriers about this a lot, and I think this is one of the ones that everyone should be watching that's in the trucking industry. I guess if you're in the broking industry too, being acutely aware of all of the festivals that are on, because produce does generate a lot of volume for the freight market. It's hard to quantify exactly how much, but this is sort of the thing that I watch a lot, because you can see these events happening, and then you can see the USDA produce volume that sort of lines up with it, which again is one of the things we put in my blog post this week that was published yesterday, is all of the different data points you could use to understand freight demand. Like all of the USDA produce data is at USDA.com. If you're a flatbed carrier, you can go to the US Census Bureau and get all the housing start data. If you're a dray carrier, you can get import data. So I put a blog post together this week that really shows all of the sample data points that are free that you can use to understand demand for whatever niche you're in, whether you're a carrier or a broker. It's not all of the data points, but it's most of the data points. And it's sort of what I'm trying to do is get carriers, thinking about not being on Facebook alone in a trucking group of like-minded carriers, but thinking about data sources or information channels that are different, where I can understand what the demand is for what I'm hauling. Just sort of widen that aperture, because I find a lot of carriers miss the mark because their focus is too narrow. They're thinking about the truck and the rate rather than the freight that they're hauling on the back.
Yeah, those festivals, 80% of them are happening over the next 4 months.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, well, funny story about that, guys. This morning, I got a message in our group chat for our dog rescue, the dog rescue that I work with, and they were looking for events, specific events that are dog friendly. And I pulled up a farm that's maybe about 10 to 15 minutes away from me, and they have like events, like every week-long events. Like they do corn, they do I think they do strawberry picking, and every week. But here's the kickoff too, Jeff, Dan, and Dean. The kickoff is after Mother's Day. So they're basically closed up until Mother's Day, and then they'll go till Halloween because they'll do pumpkins. And that's just here in Toronto, right? So we're kind of seeing that. And I'm intrigued to kind of see like the pick your own apples and those festivals. And looking at that, I got pretty hungry. I don't know about you, Dan. I feel like maybe we need to do an episode at the blueberry one so we can get some blueberry pie,
there is nothing like picking apples off the tree and eating them. Yeah. And I used to go and pick them off the tree and wipe them and eat them right away. And then I'd come home with such a stomach ache and a pint of apples, and then half the apples would go bad because you're just so sick of eating. But any of that kind of stuff, Ryan, like the raspberries, the strawberries, like fresh from the vine,
nothing like it.
The best. So, like all this stuff that we get.
The other thing I do
now.
Yeah. The other thing I do, one of the great places to learn about produce is the supermarket, because I'm like the guy down at our local store thinks I'm a little bit weird because I'm picking it up. I'm picking up the produce and looking underneath to see where it's from. Mm-hmm. Is it Chile, Mexico, Fresno, Yakima Valley? I want to know where it's come from because I want to see what's in season.
Yeah.
Because that tells me where the freight's moving and what the rates would look like. So I spend a lot of time in the cooler.
You're just there hanging out.
Over the next several weeks, I mean, you're going to see a lot of these farmer markets popping up all over the place. What Ryan was talking about, all fresh stuff,
Yeah.
So
all fresh again. Well, there's two resources too, right? There's, I don't know, for brokers, I don't know if anybody knows about this, but if you're in the produce side of being a broker, there's two resources that I used when I first got into the industry. Produce Market Guide. So it's a website where you can actually find all the local. You can put in any kind of fruit, vegetable. It'll tell you all the growers, the shippers, and it was actually a great lead gen for me. What I use, gents, and Blue Book. Blue Book of Produce is a great. You can even get certified for less than $500 and put that little icon in your email, get a little clout from there. But those are two great resources to see things like calendars. It was really important to understand what's in season and what's not in season. And as Dan was kind of mentioning about his wife, like right now watermelons are $10 a watermelon, but in 2 months, those watermelons are going to go down to $3, $4, $5, right?
Yep.
So you just got to kind of
Well,
know.
it's early season too, so a lot of them are coming out of Florida. It's kind of the watermelon capital. The other one, Ryan, is the Packer. The Packer is a really good free subscription to get hold of. Whole Produce is another. So there's plenty of magazines out there you can read that are always giving you all the latest.
We'll put in a list just for like everybody watching. We'll put together a list. I know Dan will put a list together, and then shoot the links and stuff like that to kind of help these reps.
Well, there you have it, folks. There's no scarcity mindset here.
There we go. Catch our Monday episode from there. So, Dan, I kind of want to get your opinion on something that with like produce specifically, because a lot of people think that, produce season is here, but I don't do produce. But they don't factor that, hey, some trucks are going to be taken away during this time. How did your
100%.
business change, and how did you go for? How did you change your approach when it came to produce season, whether it be RFP or just with your direct customers?
So before I realized the impact of produce, because a lot of reps right now, maybe less now because there's shows like this that bring that seasonality to the market and say, hey, listen, FYI, this is what's going to happen. I go into work one day and all of a sudden I'd have a hard time finding trucks in Georgia because they were all doing melons, and you need literally a vented trailer to haul melons. I was like, what's going on? And I'd call my regulars and say, no, we're doing melons. And like, but you're doing dry vans. Because I just automatically, in my young days, assumed every single piece of produce was put on a reefer trailer. And he goes, oh, no, man, I cut a hole. He goes, literally any van that doesn't have a vent. He goes, I'll go to Walmart, cut a hole, and just rivet a vent to it. And they'll let me haul it. And it was every year, it was a shock. And I know it's stupid, but every year it was a shock. And so finally what I did is I sat down with my largest shippers and my best carriers. And I said, listen, I need your equipment year round. Like, I understand produce and I understand. So what if the market's 1,500, I'll pay you 1,700 year round. And in negotiation with the shippers, and I could tell you probably 80% of the time, my customer is sitting with me with my carrier. Because again, this is transparency. And I worked a lot off of cost plus. And I said, listen, I'm going to make $200 a load because I'm doing this, and this in between. And my customer knew I'd provide reports and on time and all this other kind of blah, blah, blah. But we sat down and said, like, listen, we can't lose your trucks during produce. But if we pay you for, say produce is 4 weeks for melons, I'll pay you more for 11 months. That should make up that 4 weeks. And that's when my business actually didn't have a ripple during produce season. The only time that it never really worked out that way was when the customer didn't have enough volume. So I had a customer that shipped out of California, and it was always LTL on dry van. And I would have a heck of a time during produce season because a lot of these LTL guys will now go to produce truckload vented just to get a backhaul back, and it pays $10,000 instead of whatever. They don't have to do one pickup. That was the only part of my business that had a glitch from produce. And all I did was start from one side, the highest volume shipper, and I worked my way through every shipper. I did my research, what produce comes out of this area, what time of year. I mean, and it's not just the raw produce, and Dean will tell you this, like there's at one point out of the Northeast, there's chopped lettuce that comes out. So it's actually lettuce goes in, it gets chopped, put in bags and comes out, and they're hauling 7 to 8 loads a day. And that chews up a ton of the reefer capacity in the Northeast. And when you're trying to pull reefer product out of Jersey, because it's 4,000 degrees out, you got to keep powders dry for pharmaceuticals, you're competing with chopped lettuce. And it's like,
and water.
And water, yes.
Got a pollen out of Augusta, Maine. Yeah, that's why capacity is tight, because they're trying to position all the water around the country in warehouses before we get thirsty.
Exactly. It's not like we're not thirsty now.
Exactly. So Dan, Ryan, a quick point. I just pulled up the USDA national average reefer rate. So remember, a lot of produce that's high value, that has a lot of high cargo value. A lot of brokers won't use a carrier with a refrigeration motor older than 3 years.
Yes.
Right.
So I look for the R factor. So just to add on that,
Yep.
because I do seafood, Dean.
Yep.
When I'm sourcing my carriers, we have our set carriers, but we look at the R factor because we figure that they have to be 5 years or less. And the R factor is that if for me, I account that their reefer capability is going to go down by 10% every year, in terms of being there. So yeah, you're completely correct. I will not use. I need to see it, and it needs to be all there because we need even things like to send like updates. Checking like automatic reefer updates, so I can do a download rather than sending them to a Thermo King dealer and download that report after the fact to help with claims. So you got to go with new carriers.
So people say, why did dry van rates go up at the same time reefer rates go up in produce season? It's because if I've got a brand new Thermo King truck and trailer and a 53-foot spread axle reefer, and I'm set up for high value loads, so I'm hauling dry freight most of the year. The national average reefer rate this week for all temps, frozen, produce, and what's the other one? Like ice cream, frozen. Anyway, is the national average is $1.90. According to the USDA, the national average for fruit and veg is $3.60 a mile. So the guys that have got good equipment, that are hauling dry van freight most of the year, when produce season comes around, they're into the produce market, which means less capacity in dry van, rates go up. So produce rates for fruit and veg are generally much higher than the national average for all temps across the market.
Well, all depends on how you position your carriers too. For instance, all the perishables that come up from Florida into the Northeast, let's say Jersey, a long time ago, I used to fill it up with receivers and stereo equipment and send it back down to Florida so they can reload those perishables to get that. So there's so many ways to be creative on that to keep those guys moving, to your point.
Yeah, and if they have the produce out of Florida, Jeff, you're going to pay less to get your equipment down there.
Right? I just want to add something for you guys here. Like, I don't know, you guys are all brokers here as well. Isn't one of your favorite question from your lead ops guy? You get an email from them. Can they load a reefer on this load? I feel like that's always a question that we always get. So I'm always intrigued to get that question.
The only problem with that, and it's funny, is that when I used to move onions, right?
Ooh,
you do not want to put corrugated cardboard in a freshly delivered onion reefer because that corrugated absorbs the smell, and you don't want them on your shelf. So you got to be careful to make sure that
you can. I see some flatbed loads running onions at the moment because it's not that hot in some of the markets, but. The other thing is temperature, right? You can haul potatoes. I think you've got to be less than 50 degrees ambient. You can run spuds in a vented van or a dry van or even on a flatbed. Once you get a little bit hotter, you've got to watch your outside temps as to what then switches over.
Yeah, get mushy.
I used to run onions in Australia on a flatbed all the time out of the produce markets as a backhaul to hauling machinery. And we just put them on tarps. We never used straps or anything. We just tarped them down.
Were they in Gaylords?
Gaylords.
Yeah.
The big tip bins
on a pallet, and they load everything in.
These were like 60-pound bags stacked on a pallet.
Those nylon colored bags.
Yeah. We just put a 5-foot drop tarp over the sides and tighten it we tighten for the first couple of 100 kilometers, and then it'll sit there all night as long as you don't whip in the corners too hard. Trying to lift the
and the speed you were going, it probably kept the temperature down anyway. So
it did. You got the wind flowing all the way through.
He was making onion rings, on the highway.
You didn't want to be behind that truck with your windows down.
Yeah. It's almost as bad as the cattle trucks.
A chicken or turkey. Oh man, nasty.
I actually like the combination of diesel and cow manure. No, I love it. I think I grew up with diesel and cow manure. I love that smell. I'd bottle it and sell it if I could.
Dean's secret sauce.
Yeah.
Manure is great for growing vegetables, man. I'm telling you.
No, it's a great smell. Love it.
Yeah, I know.
That was my chores. My job after school as a kid was hosing out all the cattle trailers.
This show went downhill pretty quick, boys.
I was going to say, went to the dumps.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I picture Ron Burgundy sitting back going, well, that escalated quickly.
And we got Jeff who has the beard for it. But Dean, I saw something on TikTok, and I know TikTok shouldn't be a main source of information, but I want to get your opinion on it. So I was on Truckers Talk, and one new driver who actually is a pretty known guy. He actually showed that he got a brand new car. I'm sorry, not a brand new car, a brand new trailer and truck from his company, and it was actually preloaded with a 40-inch TV, a PlayStation 5, air fryer, all that fun stuff. Can you talk, because we were talking about driver retention quite a bit. It's a conversation that always comes up and different things like that. But do you think, I would say that maybe that carrier starting to incentivize drivers, not just with pay? Is that something maybe you had conversations with? Like what did you learn at TIA as well? I'd love to get into that conversation that you were there last week.
I didn't learn much about speccing, but that's part of the reason that large truckload carriers are always buying new trucks to keep up with the latest technology, right? Whether it be automatic transmissions, all of the latest safety features that allows a new driver all the creature comforts in terms of safety. But it's also the recruiting tool and the retention tool is mostly now about the sleeper. Not just the ergonomics of the seat, but it's what's in the sleeper cab. It's your home away from home. That's probably been around for 12, 15 years that OEMs have been focusing more on the sleeper cab component of the truck, putting in all of the things that in particular allow drivers to cook on the road. Right? Because there's since the air fryer came out, and I don't know when that was, a lot of drivers are cooking with air fryers in their truck. And they're cooking a lot of meals. So you see a lot of guys on TikTok just sharing recipes and they're showing what they cook. And I think that's wonderful because it's a pretty expensive deal if you don't cook on the road these days. So yes, I think there are fleets though that design trucks around a particular driver. Crete, for example, will deck out your truck in your military unit colors or something to that effect. So it's a custom truck on the outside in terms of the skin they put on. But the general rule of thumb is that good drivers will gravitate towards good trucks because the psychology is that the truck is an extension of their self-image. Yeah. And, I like to drive a Peterbilt. Like, I don't know that I could ever drive any other truck just in case I was seen in something that wasn't made of steel and had a big long hood. It's an image thing. So there are drivers out there that are very particular about what they drive because it's their image. They take pride in what they do. They're not a steerer. They're a professional driver. And so what you'll find is there's a lot of smaller fleets will order trucks specifically for a driver. And as you get tenured, like so, the most tenured driver will get the next new truck comes in. Everybody moves up one. But there are drivers out there that have the owners will design a truck around. They will let the driver spec the truck out. Engine, drivetrain, transmission, all those sorts of things, because it keeps the driver, it locks in their tenure. So
and I think that's they have to sign on for in order to get that benefit.
I don't know that there's any particular sign on, Jeff. If you're a guy that works for a fleet and there's not many fleets in that town, you don't have very many options, you're probably going to stay. I don't think the fleets are under any illusion that the driver might leave at some point. And that's very different, though, than the large truckload carrier who has to buy a run-of-the-mill standard truck that you can't spend too much money on because it's a tight margin business and it's got high driver turnover. So to sort of wrap that point up, Ryan, the good drivers gravitate towards the really good trucks. And that's why when you go to truck shows, you see some of the best trucks on the road, but they're also some of the most professional, skilled drivers you could ever imagine.
I love that. That's so cool. That's something I personally learned. I don't know about you guys, but I never knew that. Like, I never knew that would be an actual thing. Dean, you were at TIA last week. What were some things that you took away from that conference? I know we always say this every year that we should be there, but I think we definitely do need to make it a point and actually be there. I think they're in Phoenix next year. So, Dean, we'd love to hear what you thought.
Record number of people, only 2,000 people attended. The problem with an event like at the Lowe's Royal Pacific is Disneyland is literally across the road. You can hear the people screaming on the roller coaster. So the problem with large events is crowd control. If you've got 2,000 people at the conference, you have no crowd control. You can't control them in and out of sessions. So some of the sessions weren't well attended because people are sort of all over. It starts off pretty good. Then by the end of the Saturday, a lot of people have checked out and gone on to other areas, gone home, or they've gone partying. good sessions, some good speakers, good sessions. For me, it was meeting broker customers of ours and sitting and spending quality time learning about their business. Not so much the sessions. So we had a booth there, but just spending time with carriers that you see at these events all the time. Sorry, with brokers. To me, was the most important thing. That we could spend a whole session on some of the things I picked up about flatbed carrying, specialized hauling, produce hauling. Just being able to sit down and have a cup of coffee or a beer at night with some of these guys was, to me, the best part of it, because you never get a chance to do that otherwise.
Right.
Everyone's too busy.
Yeah. Tough to get them, especially all of them in one place at one time, and do it over 3-4 days. It's and you learn a lot because it's a continuation of a conversation, right?
Right.
They're not interrupted in between and stuff. Yeah, I can see that.
Yep.
Well, like Dean said, Disney's across the street. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know. I might be missing a couple of those days, to go grab, what do they call it? A Dole Whip. One of the greatest.
It was at Universal, wasn't it? Wasn't it at Universal?
No, I think it's at it's Disney. Dole Whip is Disney. It's I think it's Animal Kingdom. It's one of those things that kind of
That's a nice place, man. Stayed there.
Yeah, see, that's kind of awesome. Dean, what do you got coming on the go as we're wrapping up today's episode? What's
3 days vacation, about to head on a 3,000-mile road trip with my son. I'll be coming to you next week from Lake Tahoe. I'll be on the California side of Lake Tahoe, and it's spring out there, so I'm not sure what the quality will be like. I won't have my background with me, but I'll be full of stories from the road after 3,000 miles of mixing it up with trucks.
Make sure your background's like a beautiful scenic picture. Like even if you guys stop on the side of the road and use your laptop in your truck or something. Oh no, you said you're flying home, right?
I'll be flying home. I got it. Yeah.
I was gonna say, Dan, you don't like the hotel background? I've seen the bed and the couches on the side.
If you're in Lake Tahoe, go find a good background. You know what I'm saying? Like, get a bunch of books, prop the laptop up, sit on a stump, and now we're talking, brother. Now we're talking.
That's gonna be awesome.
I'm worried about bears. That's all I'm worried about.
We'll warn you if one comes up behind you. Don't worry.
Now, which color is it that's bad? Brown or black?
Okay, so funny enough, guys, I got something for that. So here's the rule of thumb that I learned a couple years ago. I don't know why I have this in my mind, but it always is. If it's black, fight back. If it's brown, stay down. And if it's white, good night. So there we go. Oh, that's the rule of thumb when it comes to bears. Really? Bears specifically, guys, just bears.
For no grizzly, dude. I am not doing that. I am not.
All right. Okay. Well, I've had some experience fighting kangaroos, so I'll be good.
You know how that works out there, Brian.
Dean, it does not surprise me that you fought a kangaroo.
Yeah, me too.
I gotta tell you.
I feel like it's a rite of passage, as you turn 13 in Australia.
Yeah. Oh, well, legal drinking age is 18. Yeah, so.
Do they still have kangaroo boxing over there?
No, we're not official. Sanctioned.
They had that like back in the 70s and 80s. They actually had kangaroo boxing, and
I don't think that would fly.
I think that was in the movies, Jeff.
Yeah.
Serious. I can't believe it. When I saw it, I was like, really?
Yeah.
And they say they have they're like the strongest animals out there. Like,
oh yeah.
They're like death machines. They actually are. Like if you look at them, they actually are death machines. But speaking of which, Jeff, Dan, final thoughts on today's episode?
Speaking of which, death machine. Speaking of which, final thoughts, anybody? I just, you know what, I got to add to that whole black is down, white is sleep, whatever. It all comes with peeing your pants too, because I'm sorry, if I had to lie down with a bear beside me, he'd be like, what the heck is that, dude? He just came up both sides. Like, I'm out of here, man. Sorry. That's what I got to say. Dean, you're awesome, brother. You know what? Maybe next week we can talk about some of the conversations you had at TIA and share, I mean, if it's not proprietary or anything, share what some of the customers are starting to do with their equipment to maximize use and make money.
Sure. Let's do that.
That sounds like a good idea.
With a beautiful background in Lake Tahoe and bear warnings everywhere. We'll be good.
No bears. No browns. No blacks.
There we go. So, Jeff, thoughts on today's episode? Everything's kind of going on. Even you doing your episode yesterday on Dad IQ?
Yeah. I had a great time with Dean and Ken yesterday. It was a great show. We covered many different things that needed to be addressed. Like Dean said, we're not near the bottom right now, and if we happen to go over the 2019 line, which you saw on those graphs, we're in deep trouble, and not afraid to say that. So the thing is, keep your finger on the pulse. Watch .IQ every single week on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. and keep on following us here on Sales Chatter on Saturday, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And with that said, should I say it? Absolutely. The Bodacious Cowboy is out. Have a great week, folks.
Yeah, that was awesome. You came a little too early there, though, brother. I still got to do the outro, but
I was going to say, are we going to get off an episode without talking about the Amazon driver, Ryan? What's going on?
Exactly. I'm like, what's going on here? What's going on here? But we want to thank everybody for coming out, spending your time with us. It's amazing. This is Sales Chatter, the logistics podcast where we aim to help 10,000 reps hit $1 million GP. If you found value in this, please share this with your neighbor, your friend, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, Amazon driver who's bringing in your packages today, because we all know you placed an order last night on Prime, hitting that track shipment button. So with that being said, we'll hit the replay at 2 and 6 p.m. Again, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And I guess since the Cowboy already took us home, we'll just see you guys for tomorrow. Dan and I have an amazing topic for tomorrow for Thursday, and we're gonna rattle a little bit of feathers, right, Dan? So it's gonna be pretty cool to kind of see everything. So everybody be safe. Dean, have an amazing trip. Be safe. Looking forward to seeing all the social media posts from the Grumpy Pete. And everybody take care. Cowboy, Dan, Dean, take care.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.